I'm Mike Maloney, author of Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver. It's the world's #1 best-selling book on investing in precious metals. It's available in 11 languages. And in my book, I said that we are on a wild roller coaster of a ride, and that we would first see the threat of deflation, followed by a helicopter drop, and that would be followed by big inflation, and that has happened. There was the 2008 crisis. We're seeing the base money around the planet being hyperinflated right now, while all of the credit aggregates are collapsing, and so it's sort of netting out to zero inflation or just slightly positive inflation, even though base money around the planet is just taking off like a rocket. But it would then be followed by a real deflation, and then followed by hyperinflation. So I think it sort of looks like this. We've got the markets going up in the real estate bubble in 2007, and then we had the threat of deflation, which was the 2008 market crash and the big helicopter drop of currency, and you are here. And then I think that we're going into something like this, and it'll be followed by the world's central banks overreacting. People say, some people say I've been calling for hyperinflation, hyperinflation, hyperinflation. There isn't any time that I can find in all of history where a population that's all on one side of the boat, when you have a nation of debtors, what has to happen is that you go into a deflation first, allowing the banks to foreclose, and the public in general is on the losing side of the bet.
We are entering a period of financial crisis that is the greatest the world has ever known. The wealth transfer that will take place during this decade is the greatest wealth transfer in history. Wealth is never destroyed, it is merely transferred, and that means that on the opposite side of every crisis there is an opportunity. The great news is that all you have to do to turn this crisis into your great opportunity is to educate yourself. I believe that the best investment that you can make in your lifetime is your own education. Education on the history of money, education on finance, education on how the global economy works, education on how all of these guys, the central bankers, the stock market, how they can cheat you, how they can scam you. If you learn what is going on and how the financial world works, you can put yourself on the correct side of this wealth transfer. Winston Churchill once said that the further you look into the past, the further that you can see into the future. This program is all about creating your own crystal ball, being able to gaze into the future, being able to change this crisis, the greatest crisis in the history of mankind, into your great opportunity.
Well, I've been traveling overseas quite a bit, but I'm on my way home now to speak at an event in California finally. What I've been trying to make clear is the fact that this roller coaster crash that I was talking about in my book and that I've been predicting since 2005 is playing out right before our eyes. One of the things I really like about speaking at live events is the chance to interact with people and sort of get my finger on the pulse of what they're thinking. And lately it's become pretty obvious that for a lot of people it's difficult to grasp why I think deflation is coming before big inflation or even hyperinflation. So here I'm going to break down 4 of the biggest reasons that I see deflation coming first. The first one is simple. The overreaction to the 2008 crisis has caused a credit debt bubble, and all bubbles pop.
So I talked about hyperinflating base money. This is hyperinflation right here. Inflation and deflation is either an expansion or a contraction of the currency supply, and prices follow the inflation or deflation eventually. Now, most of this currency does not circulate. It's sitting on banks' balance sheets in what's called excess reserves. If you look at the years leading up to this crisis, this red line is reserve balances. The white line is how much of it is excess. And here we have Alan Greenspan's response to 9/11. Look at the scale of how big this emergency is compared to 9/11. But what is Ben Bernanke afraid of, and now Janet Yellen has inherited this legacy? Well, one of the things that happened in the 2008 crisis is that banks froze up and wouldn't lend to each other. They were all scared to lend to each other. And our system is such a fraud that at the end of each day, they all have to be able to borrow digits from each other that were created from nothing just to keep the whole smoke and mirrors game going. They all have to do this interbank lending to keep things balanced. Well, if one bank won't lend to another and they don't have any reserves, the whole system freezes up. Now, if you've got all these excess reserves that are on their balance sheet and you pay them interest to keep the reserves there and not use this as a basis of fractional reserve lending, they're going to be liquid. This basically prevents bank runs by banks on banks. It's not a public bank run with the public lining up at the doors. It's a bank run where one bank is trying to get their currency out of another or won't lend to another. And so this keeps things liquid. Right now, what this has done, though, the banks get to use this stuff in the middle of the day. And so you see the use of margin in the stock market going to record levels. You see the stock market going to record levels, things like, I follow collector cars, and they've been going astronomical. The number of $10 million cars out there now is just absolutely insane, and there are cars now selling for $30 million. Wine collections, art, it's all going ballistic at this point. And all bubbles pop. This is the average price of a new home divided by the median annual household income. Normally, 3-4 times your income is about what you can afford with a house. When you drop in interest rates, the affordability goes up, so people pay more for a house. But interest rates don't stay in one spot forever. They have to revert sometime or another. And all these people are going to be trapped. Every bubble pops, that's a bubble. We are in for something big again, and this time it's going to be more horrific than the crash of 2008, simply because the response to 2008 created a lot of stored energy. And then when the market crashes, that energy is released in the opposite direction. That previous chart of the hyperinflation of base money, well, we're going to get a reaction from all of this. Whatever bubble you're in, the opposite happens of what is of greatest benefit to the most people. Right now, if we went into big inflation or hyperinflation, the average Joe six-pack would get rewarded for mass stupidity. They're all out on credit. We're in a credit boom. We're in a bond bubble. Those bubbles have to pop, and the popping of a credit bubble is deflationary.
It's deflationary. And history's crystal clear on that. A lot of the gold bugs say, the Federal Reserve and central banks, they're creating money, which they are unprecedented. But they're actually inflating to fight the deflation that started to set in the late 2008, early 2009. And if you look back at history, you say every major debt and financial asset bubble in history, the railroad bubble of the early 1870s at peak,